Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Marissa Waterman. I'm the Marketing Director here at the Academy. Today's webinar is titled Iconic Arizona Highway, a Victim of Fires and Floods. Our Executive Director, Dr. Daniel Other, will serve as the moderator and will introduce our speaker today. During the presentation, you'll be able to submit a question by clicking on the Q&A icon on the bottom of your screen. Before we get started, Dr. Other would like to say a few words. Dan, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Marissa. Thanks. I appreciate it. Welcome to everyone who's joining us today. As you all know, Academy programs often are free to our members. The goal of our programs, including webinars, is to grow, connect, and diversify the environmental profession. And today is a great example of making those connections across diverse specialties. Today, we're going to be thinking about geotechnical and transportation engineering and how that relates to environmental engineering and science. As we begin, I'd like to say a special thanks to the Academy patrons. Patrons are organizations who see benefit in the work of the Academy, and to ensure the success of that work, patrons provide us with much needed financial support. Thank you to the patrons. Also, I'd like to offer a very, very special thanks to Stanley Consultants, who are the sponsors of today's webinar. Webinars offered by the Academy are vetted by a team of experts who offer feedback on subject content to ensure that every webinar is of value to our members. Through the generous financial support of Stanley, we are pleased to offer this webinar free to members of the Academy. Thank you, Stanley, for your support. And now on to the main event. Marissa, when I read the title for this webinar, I was struck with a feeling of the apocalypse. It's kind of like Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, lions and tigers and bears, oh my. Engineers are always on the lookout for ways to improve health, safety, welfare for the public through projects that we design and build and implement as well as manage. Today's presentation is no different. But what makes it seem different to me is that we're looking at a project for a future that is both respectful of the past as well as considers challenges that we face in terms of changing weather patterns. I'm looking forward to hearing how engineers and scientists build for a future of change. And today we're joined by an exceptional professional engineer. Dustin Robbins is a principal civil engineer at Stanley Consultants. Dustin brings a passion for delivering projects for Stanley. This stems from his years of experience leading projects as a consulting engineer and as a former engineer with the Federal Highway Administration. With a technical background in geotech, Dustin has worked on numerous transportation projects for the Department of Transportation, federal highways, and public agencies in the mountains and western regions of the United States. As a transportation project manager, Dustin is eager to deliver quality drawings, team building, engaging with stakeholders, resolving conflicts, program management, and delivering successful projects. His transportation experience includes project management and is inclusive of geotech engineering for local roadways, state highways, rehabilitation projects, multi-use trails, multimodal transportation, and parking facilities. Clearly, Dustin is an expert worth learning from. And today we're going to hear from Dustin. And then I'll return at the end of the webinar to lead a moderated discussion. As a reminder to all, please place your questions in the QA function. I'll be reading them throughout the webinar, and I'll try to address as many as I can in our discussion. Dustin, my friend, we're excited to learn more from you. If you want to come off mute and turn on your video, the stage is yours. Welcome to this webinar.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. That was a wonderful introduction. I want to say, I guess first as we get started here, I'm really honored to get this chance to do this, to speak to the Academy here. You mentioned in my introduction there that I actually, let me fast forward our slides here real quick. But hold on. Oh, there we go. I got to click. Okay. So I am very honored to get a chance to do this. You mentioned kind of the things that I've been involved with in my career. What you didn't hear in there was, technical training in environmental engineering. But if I'm being honest with y'all, that was actually something I really did want to study, where I wanted my career to go early on. But There was a different plans, and I've ended up, I think, really enjoying my career so far in the transportation field. But to get a chance to come and talk to specialists in this field, that's an honor for me. So kind of right as we get started here, I'll let you, look at the title. Maybe I'll move this down so I'm not looking at myself. And oh, that's a little bit better. You guys can see the slides better. While you take a look at the kind of the landscape here, as I was preparing this morning, reading through my slides, I was I noticed, hey, I get about halfway through my presentation before I really introduce the project that we're working on. And at first I thought that was a little bit strange, and I thought maybe, oh shoot, I should talk about the project earlier. But I actually think that maybe that's the right idea, and maybe shows how much I've learned as a transportation engineer working on environmental projects, and really leads me to one of the points that I want to drive home, is that context really matters when you're delivering a project. So, transportation engineers, we quickly get into the nuts and bolts. We're looking at safety. We're looking at how to move people through a corridor, but sometimes we forget to stop and really digest the context of the project that we're trying to accomplish. So we are going to kind of dive in for a while to the context here, but the point is, and it is one of my main points here, is that context really does matter. So let's start off here. I wanted to post a quote here from that's President Teddy Roosevelt there on the right. He was involved with this route. The dam that this route accesses was named after him. And I've traveled the route. I think if you're from the Southwest, particularly in Phoenix, you've probably either traveled it or are aware of it. I think the quote sums it up pretty well. I'll let you read that on your own, but it captures pretty well how spectacular this route is. And there's just a shot of the route. I mean, it looks like a trail from above, but it's a road. It's actually a road that people travel. It's, I think, pretty spectacular. So just, with that little teaser of an introduction, I'll tell you just real quickly about myself, who I am. I did study civil engineering, and really my career has gone the route of, early on, I was a geotechnical specialist that worked mostly in the geotechnical field. That was in Nevada, Arizona a little bit, and then mostly Colorado. And then I went and spent several years as a project manager for Federal Highway Administration. That's with the Central Federal Lands Highway Division. It's a group within federal highways that actually delivers projects, and they do it on federal lands or for projects that access federal lands. So that's where really my overlap with the environmental world came to be, is when you're managing projects, you quickly learn how important having a really good environmental protection specialist is on your team. We have a group of those here at Stanley, and I find them to be extremely valuable to project delivery. So just a real quick overview of the route that we're going to talk about. Again, it's called the Apache Trail, but it is a road. It's a road that travels in its entirety 42 miles from the eastern edge of Phoenix, in a place called Apache Junction, and it goes all the way through the mountains, kind of very rugged mountainous terrain up to Roosevelt Dam, and it generally follows the Salt River. And this would be an alternative route you could take to get to this part of Arizona. So there's another major highway that you could take. You could drive a lot higher speeds, but this is a route that people might want to take if they want the more scenic route. But so like I was saying in the very beginning, it's a statement I think I'll repeat multiple times here, is that context really does matter. Before this was a road, it was actually a foot trail. And probably don't know the exact time that this started being used as a foot trail, but we're talking, many hundreds of years to thousands of years in the past. So it was used by a couple of different tribes, and for many, many generations. They would go from the, I guess what would that be? Their winter homes would be down in the valley, in the hotter desert area, and their summer homes would be up in the mountains. And so this trail had been in place, and this is similar to a lot of our highways that we have in the United States, is they follow old trail routes. So, starting with those, many, many years of history of it being a foot trail, if we kind of move up in our timeline to about 1902, President Roosevelt commissioned a dam to be built. And so Phoenix was growing and growing and growing, and they needed a way to control the Salt River so they would have regular, consistent access to irrigation water. They were having a lot of flooding problems with the Salt River. And so President Roosevelt is commissioning a lot of dams at this time. That was something that was going on quite a bit at that time in history. So dam was commissioned, and they needed to figure out, how are we going to get construction materials up to build this dam? And that's where this route comes in. So there's some photographs shows this route was actually built by hand. And one of the interesting components of it is, at the time they're thinking, well, we've got to get construction materials 40 plus miles from the city of Phoenix up to this dam site. And that's really all that they're focused on at this point, is getting the materials up there. So it wasn't really a designed road per se. Today we have design standards, we have safety standards, we consider drainage, we have all this multifaceted approach. And I think at this time it was really, let's just get the materials up there, and we'll worry about the rest later. And that does become a problem in the future. So one of the interesting notes here is that this also was built majority from Native Americans, including the Apache. So they really do have that tribe. This route means a lot to them. Got a few photographs. Sorry, this one's a little bit blurry, that show the completed route. You've got a stagecoach going through here. This is more of an artistic rendering, but this is a famous area called Fish Creek Hill, or near Fish Creek Hill, along the route. This photograph was taken, just in the last few years. This is, you can see something resembling a guardrail that was installed at some point. And I'll tell you, if you haven't been on this route, this might not look like that much, but the grade of the road is incredibly steep. And then if you look off the road to your right, it's kind of absolutely terrifying. So this is a very dramatic sight. And here's a picture of the completed dam. So this was taken again just a few years ago. This dam was completed well over 100 years, and you can see it's a pretty impressive engineering structure. So just the feat alone to build this dam, and then 40 plus miles of road, over 100 years ago to get to it, I think is a pretty impressive, an ambitious project. So. We're going to reference a timeline a little bit here because we're talking about the historic context. And so, we've talked about, more of the ancient history. We talked about the dam and the road being built. Well, the dam was completed here in 1911. And then at that point, I think we probably will start talking about the next 100 years. Like, what do you do with the road after it's been completed? And so there was some discussions in the early 1900s. What are we going to do with this route? It was decided that it was valuable. There was going to be some potential dam projects on other portions of the route. And so let's keep this. And it was transferred to ADOT in 1922. And although those projects did happen, it was used to access some different areas. It really started to shift to like a scenic and recreational route. That's pretty much what it's known as today. So kind of the next in the era is it really becomes even more of just, you know, a scenic route for the locals. It becomes a tourist destination. And these little brochures here, I mean, you don't need to worry about trying to read the text on those. They're small, but it's to show you that it was advertised tourist destination. And so, you know, you'd have a railroad company say, hey, we'll take you out to California. And by the way, if you want to see something really special, we'll stop in Phoenix and we'll take you on a tour of this magnificent Apache Trail. It's actually when it was given the name Apache Trail, and that was by the Southern Pacific Railroad. They actually gave them the name during this time. And so, you know, that's the history. I would say it's continued along that, in that vein of being still a scenic route more than a commuter route. You don't find commuter traffic. It's really for scenic traffic. But another part of the historic context, besides just the use, is what physically happened to the road. Well, in the last 100 years, as ADOT has been maintaining this, and I should point that out, that's Arizona DOT, Arizona Department of Transportation. As they've been forced to maintain this route, they've had to do a lot of different improvements. And that kind of becomes a bigger deal later on down the road when we try to make improvements. They've had to improve it over the years. And what you find is kind of interesting if you look at those 4 pictures on the right, is you do see pretty clearly 4 different eras of construction, different types of construction. You can also see the inadequacy of the drainage features. You look at the bottom right there. You know, people think, oh, this is the desert. It doesn't rain. Well, it doesn't rain often, but when it does, it often rains really, really hard, and it can move a lot of sediment and, you know, plug up your culverts. And when that happens, you can really have some damage to your roadways. So this is kind of, you know, showing us that things are probably under-designed. I guess my next point here is, I wanted to make sure that everybody understood. In 1986, this thing was actually designated as a historic road. And so that will, as we get further and further, that really informs how ADOT is going to go about doing improvements to the road for maintenance and other things like that. And that's something that we had to interact with quite a bit when we get to our actual project. Okay, so I think at this point, you know, now that we've kind of looked at the history, we can look at it as a little more from a modern point of view. Today, I would say, as people would travel this route, you'd break it up into 3 main segments. You've got an initial segment that gets you to the Fish Creek Hill area, and from the Fish Creek Hill area to the Apache Lake Marina. I'll talk more about these in detail in the next couple of slides. So what I'm calling here just segment 1 is the area that comes out of Apache Junction. This one here is relatively flat. It's about 19 miles long. It was paved. And when I say relatively flat, I really mean relative to the rest of the route. I say there's more traffic on this route. This is people will go up to this Tortilla Flat town, and there's a store there that people like to stop at, take photographs and things like that. So there's, you know, segment 1. We're not really going to talk about that, but as a side note here, I want to make the point that although our project was just on one of these 3 segments, when you're talking about history and you're talking about a historic route, you really need to think about the entirety of the route. You can't just say, well, look, maybe we're impacting one segment or one portion. It's the entirety of the route that you have to keep that whole context in mind. Okay, so segment 2, this is the really dramatic area. A lot of the photographs that you're going to see of the Apache Trail are going to show this area as the Fish Creek Hill area. You know, just extremely, extremely steep. I mean, you talk about grades up to 18%. That's you're nervous when you're driving that. It's not something that we're used to driving these days. So this is I call the most scenic route, or scenic portion of the route. And as we get to segment 3, this is really the focus of our project. This goes from the Apache Lake Marina. So this is a place that people like to come. They can take boats out. And so you can think about the challenges of actually getting a boat on such a tight route like this, pulling a boat, but people, they do it, they brave the topography there. So it goes from Apache Lake Marina to Roosevelt Dam. And I guess some of the important points on this is it was also unpaved. So it really had some of that original character of the original route. Still quite steep, still quite narrow. And this region, because it does get the traffic coming from the north and the east, there has been quite a few maintenance improvements because there is pressure for ADOT to keep this route maintained so that people can access the marina. Okay, and so that's really where this project stems from. So now here we are, or maybe a third of the way into the presentation, I'll actually talk about the project. This is 2017 now, and the project stakeholders, and that would really be Arizona Department of Transportation, the Tono National Forest. They've got a pretty serious maintenance problem. This is requiring weekly maintenance. So just to keep the road passable, ADOT has to go out once a week and regrade the road. But at the same time, everybody's well aware, because of the historic designation of the road, how do we improve a road and not impact or have an effect to an adverse effect to the historic nature of this route. They want to protect it for the future generations to be able to travel this route. So that was really the big challenge. And so what ADOT and the forest did is they applied for something called the Federal Lands Access Program, and that's how I ended up getting involved with this project. And that provides federal funding for projects that projects that are accessing federal lands. And this is obviously accessing federal lands, a lot of forest facilities around there. And so they said, hey, though, the goal is not to turn this into some major highway. The goal is we've really got to reduce the maintenance burden. So let's talk about the scope that we came up with there. So, what we found, and I'm going to kind of camp out on a couple of slides here for just a minute and go a little bit slower, so we can understand some of the finer points here. But the major idea was we've got to reduce the maintenance burden. It was becoming unsustainable for ADOT. I think at the time it was pretty clear that they're seeing more and more flooding events, high flow events that are impacting the road. So they needed to do something. The biggest way we figured out that we could reduce their maintenance burden was actually simply to pave it. And I know that doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but when you go and pave a road that was historically a gravel road and it's a historic road, well, there's some considerations there. And we'll find out later, we did end up with an adverse effect to historic properties based solely on that paving. But what we wanted to do was, you had a lot of drainage features in like we said, even though these weren't very well designed, they were mostly undersized. This is where the history was really obvious. So you could look at these culvert head walls, stacked stone, a lot of them built during the Civilian Conservation Corps era. They're, pretty breathtaking. And, those we wanted to try to keep intact as much as possible. And the thought was, well, okay, now ADOT, maybe they don't have to go out and maintain it every week, but they could go out and maintain the road and do repairs on it when, say, there is a big rain event and there is some damage that happens. So the other part I'll just say is, for safety purposes, there was an idea that, maybe it would be great to widen this road. Not only is that tremendously expensive in a project like this, you really do start to lose that primitive nature of this route. And it's no longer going to feel like 100-year-old route. And that's something that there was a desire to preserve that. So we introduced other safety countermeasures to improve safety, where feasible. Okay, so the National Environmental Policy Act, and I'll tell you, when I first got introduced to this project, and I was a new project manager for federal highways, I was one of those that thought it was the National Environmental Protection Act. That seems obvious, but that's how you can tell who's been around or not. I guess the key component here is we did do a full environmental assessment for this project, knowing that cultural resources would be the big item here, and that we also have a lot of public involvement. When it came to other environmental resources like biological resources and things, there wasn't a tremendous amount. There were some, but probably not enough to go into in this presentation. A key component, if you're a NEPA person, is that who was going to be the lead agency. Well, it was led by Federal Highways, and that it would be a little bit different than, say, the forest or ADOT leading NEPA on a project like this. We did do as required cultural resources report. I would say nothing surprising here. The route had been well studied, so it wasn't like we came up with anything really new here, but this is part of the process. And we did have some Native American sites. We had a lot of sites from the original road construction. And this would set us up for the consultation work that we would do next. Okay, so here's another slide that I think I wanted to take a minute on and drive home some points that I walked away with. These are career lessons for me. So Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act really requires the consultation with the State Historic Preservation Office anytime you're dealing with a project that is on the National Register or would be eligible for the National Register. So obviously we were in that situation here. The process itself, I guess one of the points here is that it is a process. It's not a one-time thing that you just, you get in, you go to a meeting, you come out with a conclusion, and you walk away and you don't think about it again. It's not something to just check off your list. And really, I think as people who are trying to deliver projects, you can feel that pressure of, I got to get through this quickly. I got to get through this without, mitigation. I got to make this simple. I urge people to relieve yourself of that pressure and understand that this process is in place for a reason. The other part is, we knew this was going to be difficult. The Arizona SHPO, when we first met with them, when we were starting off this project, they used this term, the crown jewel. They said this route is the crown jewel of transportation resources in the state of Arizona. And so knowing that going into this, and there was a long history of ADOT working with the SHPO and the forest working with the SHPO, and walking into that as Federal Highways, we knew it was going to be tough. I think the takeaway is, make sure you actually engage with this process. You can't avoid it. So you really got to face it head on and be open during these initial discussions. You can't get too far ahead of yourself where then all of a sudden you feel like, oh, the SHPO's telling me I can't do this, can't do that. So that was really important. I would tell you, if you've ever been a part of any of these types of consultations, or if you haven't, what we went through here was a lot. It was a lot of meetings, a lot of discussions. And at the end, I think we ended up where we should be. And our determination was that we would have an adverse effect to historic properties. I'm not an expert in the different criterion for historic properties, but we were going to be having an impact on those, and therefore we did have the adverse effect. And the SHPO concurred with that. And so we knew that we were going to work through a mitigation and a project memorandum of agreement or route memorandum of agreement and MOA. And so that's where we were. And I think we were at a big step through all that consultation. We had gotten to the concurrence and we had started working through the mitigation, the MOA. And then show you my next slide here. The whole area kind of catches on fire. And this is right there in the summer of 2019. And so June 8th, you've got 125,000 or so acres that are burned. It didn't burn our actual route, but it burned the watershed all around it. This is right as we were discussing, mitigation and everything that what we're going to do. And the big problem with this, I mean, you say, okay, look, the landscape is burned. That's unfortunate. Well, what happens when you lose all that vegetation is you destabilize the watershed. And so, I don't know what the actual predictions were. I've heard 3, 4, 5, 7 years of issues you're going to have potentially with flooding after this. And, and it could be even more than that. So we knew we'd have a problem for a while. And the question is what to do. Well, it really didn't take long. So in September now, in November of 2019, we have 2 big flood events come through. And you can see the damage in the photographs here on the side. It was pretty devastating for the route. These are all taken in segment 3 where our project was. So these are pipes and head walls that we had planned to leave in place. This is a low water crossing up here that is now undercut by 4 or 5 feet. So all things that we hadn't planned to do anything with. A few more photographs here. One thing to note, just kind of as a side point here, is that this did result in the long-term closure of segment 2 that I was talking about. This is the really scenic route, and it is still closed today. So it's been about 4 years or so that this route has been closed off as a through route. You can't take it right now from Phoenix to the dam. So still that way. You can see the major rock slides there in the photographs. And ADOT was in a really tough spot to try to figure out what to do with this route. But I'll tell you all as a side note, that's something that Stanley's actually working on right now with ADOT. They completed our group completed a design concept report and environmental overview to get this route back open. And they're working with ADOT toward a design on that right now. So it will be open again, it sounds like, but still closed up to this day. So you're talking about a pretty tremendous impact. Up at the top, you've got another photograph of a culvert that was on segment 3 where our project is. And you can see, completely cut behind the head there. So tons of erosion back there. On the other side, you've got a cut at the outlet. So it's just a big mess. And, I think at this point, we had to figure out what to do. So like I mentioned before, we were pretty much done with NEPA. We were done with our Section 106 consultation. Feeling good toward moving to our final design. I'd say we were at about a 90% level design. And then when this happens, again, you can't be bothered by the fact that, oh man, this is so frustrating. I have to go back to the beginning. I have to go back to say, a 30% level design, but that's what we had to do. That's the purpose of the NEPA process and these consultations is to handle this when the context does change on you, is to incorporate this into your project. So there was some pretty substantial impacts on our SHPO consultation. This is another slide I think I ought to take maybe just a minute on. We had a lot of meetings again, a lot of follow-up meetings on this. And with the new context, we really did need to change our approach. The flood event showed the inadequacy. I mean, I think a lot of the engineers knew, a lot of the people who worked on the route knew all of this, but this was a public demonstration of the inadequacy of the drainage infrastructure. I think during those meetings, there start to become clear from, again, the forest, the SHPO, everybody, that, there's a fear that if we don't do anything to improve the drainage, we might be in a situation where we actually lose this route, that people can't drive it in the future. That's not something that anybody wanted. Also, I think in these discussions, we took kind of I guess I would maybe call it like a qualitative approach to incorporating the fact that climate change is something that we're facing. So we didn't do any real study on that, but we know that these are going to become, more and more, these types of events are going to become more and more common. As another side note on the segment 2 project, we've got a group here at Stanley who actually does take a quantitative approach to forecasting increases in runoff and adjusting design events based off of future climate change. And so that's something we're working on for the segment 2 project. But for this one, it was more of a qualitative approach, but it fit into the discussion of what we're going to do. And ultimately they decided, we want to try to salvage whatever history we can on this route, but we want people to be able to access it. And therefore we did adjust scope and we started looking at how to improve some of these drainage features. This is just a quick one. This is something that is required through NEPA for where we were at with this project. And that's a historic properties treatment plan. I won't really get into this, but this is something that we have to include in the construction contract for, what we're going to do with the historic properties during the construction work. So the other big piece to wrap up then, I think once we came to a consensus on what the scope of the revised scope of the project was going to be, so we had to work through a memorandum of agreement, and the parties to that were ADOT and the Toronto National Forest and the tribes. And I guess Federal Highways was also a part of that because they were required to complete the mitigation work as part of the construction contract. And so the mitigation commitments are the big ticket item in this MOA. I mean, there are other things that it's an important document for a lot of reasons, but I'll focus on the mitigation commitments because I think that's where there's some interesting things as we move forward. All right, so so here, I wanted to talk for a few minutes about the mitigation and what we did. So, in fact, I'll give a little story. So we knew it would be big, like we had talked about. We knew this would be a big deal. We're having an adverse effect to a very historic road. So we knew we were going to have to do more than just your typical mitigation of, say, maybe some interpretive panels. But when we were having a meeting with the SHPO, our environmental specialist on the project starts going through, what our proposed approach was, and it's pretty much where we ended up. But the first thing that he talked about was kind of the easy one. Yes, we will do some interpretive panels. But the person at the SHPO was confused, and they said, if you think you're going to have an impact to the Apache Trail and you're just going to do, interpretive panels, you're out of your mind. And it's like, no. We've got other things here. But yeah, so this is, I would say the mitigation for this is a big deal because our impact is big, and really the mitigation is supposed to be commensurate to the level of the impact that you have. And so, we had discussions about what that could be. And I think the big piece that the SHPO really landed on, they were pushing for the design team is, we want a public education approach. We want people to understand the history here. And so that is something that we ran with. I will run through the interpretive panels real quick, just to let you know, we did 9 new ones, which is actually, quite a bit. There were existing panels out there, so we wanted to complement those and not just duplicate the information that was there. And we did locate these not just on our 11 miles. Again, this is a 42-mile historic road. We don't have to keep that just specifically to our 11 miles, so there wasn't great locations for them. We found some other locations that would work better. And I'll just kind of skim through these. I don't try to read all the text. I'm going to go too fast, but I think the point here is, we had 9 different topics that kind of give you the overall history of the route and some interesting pieces. There's a lot of discussions again on these, negotiating what would be, what's the right number, and what's the right topics or content. Let's see here. So, okay. So that was kind of phase 1 of mitigation. Phase 2, we did some what they call HAIR documentation, Historic American Engineering Record documentation. So we knew these culverts were going to be destroyed. I think there was over 100 culverts on the project, and I think we were impacting, maybe 50 or 60 of them. It was a pretty substantial number. And yeah, so what we did is we looked at all the culverts. We came up with a list of about 15 that really captured the history. And there were duplicates of different things. So these 15 were the core ones, and we did HAIR documentation. So we commissioned that prior to construction. If you're familiar with HAIR documentation, it goes to a very specific standard. And then they're archived in the Library of Congress. And so it's essentially a permanent record of the history. But the last one, and for mitigation, I wanted to talk through is what I think was the most creative form of mitigation that we came up with. And that's to develop a coffee table book. So this is a book that's not available yet, but it will be. And it'd be available through ADOT. But we're basically writing a book, and it's well over 100 pages long. I've seen some of the drafts of it. Here in the photographs, I got 2 different styles. So this is back during some of the planning meetings when we were trying to figure out what the style ought to look like. I think it's about 10 chapters long. There's a lot of input from the tribes, which is really kind of cool. You don't always get to do that, but we've had a few tribal members that are well aware of the history, and they are providing their perspective in this book, which is going to be really excellent. And it's really just meant to tell the story of the Apache Trail. And so one of the fun things that came out of this is we needed really good photography for it, not just the historic photographs. And so we were able to commission some drone photographs, which is some of the ones that you've seen earlier, and I've got a few others here just to kind of skim through to share with the group. Pretty amazing that that's a road. You don't usually do switchbacks like that unless you're really on a high mountain or something, but this is the way it was designed, and it's quite fun to drive. Couple shots. I'll just go slowly through these so people can take a look. It's a beautiful shot of the Salt River there, and the Apache Trail here on the left next to the river. And just flipped backwards the other direction. That's the Roosevelt Dam and Lake Roosevelt, and the bridge for State Highway 188 back there, and just a more zoomed in view of that. So, okay, well, we're getting toward the end here. I did want to talk a little bit about construction considerations here. We are transportation engineers trying to deliver a project, so that involves construction. And how do you, when you have this historic context and you have these historic requirements, how do you take that and you put it in a contract so that the contractor honors those things and is required to honor those things, and knows how to bid their work properly? I mean, there could probably be a whole webinar on on how to do things like that. Taking environmental commitments and putting them into contract language is not an easy thing to do. But just a couple of examples, we had to handle unanticipated discoveries, and that actually did happen. We had some during construction. We had a couple of culverts that we thought were fine, didn't need to be replaced. Well, when they got out there, they found out they actually did have a hole in them or something, and they did need to be replaced. And then we had to say, okay, wait a minute, hold on, don't touch that. I know it looks like it needs to be replaced, but we need to check on some things first. So that's something we had to deal with. We had areas where we knew there was likely buried head walls. The archaeologists were able to pick that up. They figured there probably were in certain areas. So as you can see on this list on the left, we've got a bunch of different locations, station ranges where we were going to require specific archaeological monitoring during construction, during excavation in those areas, in case there were historic head walls that had not been documented. And so that's just, I guess, a couple of examples for construction. And then, I thought y'all might want to know what's going on with the project. It was initiated in September of 2022. It was about an $18 million contract. It's not an easy construction project. It's very narrow bench, and it's very remote. You can only come in, like I said, from the one side. You can't come in from Phoenix. So every time you go down the route, you got to turn around. And if you're driving in, just your regular vehicle, it'll take you to go 11 miles. It'll take you 45 minutes to an hour because it's such steep and winding roads. So that makes it difficult. We do have the stakeholders at the marina. So we got to think about the public who wants to go visit the marina, and to get some of the new culverts in, we had to work on night closures and get some night closures for Monday through Thursday. So there was a lot. Again, that could probably be a whole extra presentation. But the completion is scheduled right now for spring of 2024. I think they've done pretty much everything except for the final paving. All right. And so I've got just a couple conclusions. Number one, I guess, is climate change in these desert environments. For me, not coming from a strict environmental background, I didn't always associate climate change with my transportation projects. And this is an example of where it does really come into play. So as we see more of these extreme wildfires and more of these flooding events, well, hey, are we going to lose historic roads? Are historic roads going to be, damaged? I mean, that's just something that wouldn't have crossed my mind ahead of time before working on a project like this. But now I realize that's a real concern related to climate change. And then, the others are the ones that I've kind of been driving home from the beginning. And I can't stress enough that context matters. And it's not just in the historic point of view. So, when we're talking about the public that we serve, when we do roadway projects, we need to think about, the public. I mean, this goes very deep. Context really, really does matter. The other one is, the NEPA process for transportation engineers, for roadway folks, you tend to get nervous when you hear about NEPA, right? It's something you don't want to engage with. You just want it to go away so you can do your work. I can't stress enough that you got to engage with this process. It's doing that early on will make your life so much better. It's like the avoidance tactic that most people take just sets them up for more trouble, more stress, more issues at the end of a project. So highly stress that to all transportation engineers: engage with the NEPA process, include your stakeholders from the very beginning. And if you're an environmental specialist, I want to say for myself, coming from a transportation background, very, very highly valued member of the team, especially when you deal with a project like this. So couldn't have done this without our environmental team on this project. So I think that is the end there, Dan.
Dustin, that was awesome. Thank you so much. That's fantastic. We'll maybe kill the slides so we can have our smiling faces up, if you don't mind, if you want to do the stop share.
Hold on.
Yeah, and we'll hang on to that because we'll end up coming back to that one at the end. I think if you just do the stop sharing down at the bottom.
Down at the, did I do stop share yet or no? I'm still sharing.
Screen. If you just go back to not sharing, that'll be great.
There we go.
Hey, perfect. Fantastic. Great. That was a fantastic webinar, my friend. I really appreciate it. It was a really it was insightful to see it from an engineering perspective, presenting something like that, right? I mean, I would have expected that maybe from somebody who was kind of like a historian or, you know, social scholar or something, like dealing with the archaeology. So kudos to you from taking it from a, you know, a technical perspective. So I've been looking at the items that are in the Q&A. I do encourage people to continue to putting them in there. We've got a few that are maybe a little bit more technically questions, a little bit, some that are a little bit more general questions, but maybe I'll just kind of paint out the stuff that we've got, and then we'll come back and kind of visit them in pieces. So some of the questions start off with some of your background, this idea that you're dealing with this, you know, historical site and what that means. And there is this balance there, right? You've got local residents or local use that's going on right now. So, you know, how much do you disrupt what's going on right now so that you can remember the past of X number of years ago? So that's an issue. But then as we're thinking about this, one of the ones is to think even more broadly. When we start to think historical, well, now we're in this world of kind of like a social justice standpoint. So, you know, you can imagine we're probably not too far from thinking about, okay, thinking about these historical things in ways that we haven't even thought about them up to this point, right? And so it's not just the who used it and who designed it before, but how are we trying to, you know, pay respect to those memories from before? And some of those might even be painful memories as opposed to celebratory type memories. So that's maybe a space we'll touch on. Then, of course, you get into this wildfire, right? It burns the vegetation. And so we've got folks that are asking like some technical questions there. You know, impacts of runoff on the Salt River. I mean, when we saw those pictures, we're like, wait, that roadway is right next to the river. So how is that impacting water quality? Technical ones, you know, how were slope stability issues resolved, right? So there's a little bit more of a geotech. And then a little bit more of this, you know, we heard some words that probably some of us aren't that familiar with, right? You know, so State Historic Preservation Office, Historical American Engineering Record, right? You know, HARE and SHPO. I wasn't that familiar with those acronyms, so I'm on Google looking them up. But when we're thinking about this stuff, yeah, you've got these panels that are going in, right? But the coffee table book was really cool. People want to know, how do we get access to it? But how about like 3D scanning of the route? I mean, how about geotagging? How about, you know, like, does it just have to be pull off the road with your car and look at the interpretive panel there? Or is there something richer that we can do in a digital age that even looks more forward thinking about how do we pay homage to these sites, and how do we, and relative to NEPA, as you were saying, right? You know, the mitigation has to be proportionate to what we're disrupting, right? And so how does technology help us mitigate those in even faster, better ways? And then I really liked your, you know, I think people were commenting on your lessons learned at the end, right? And so we'll kind of come back and talk about those. Wait, climate change stuff is creeping in, and I never thought it would be there. And public, and hey, that NEPA process might be helpful rather than challenging. So those are some of the questions that were coming in that we're going to talk through. And I see I've got some more coming in, but what I'm going to do is let's go back up to kind of the start. Let's think about historically and things to maybe to think about. So how do you address local use while all this stuff is going on, thinking about maintaining history, but then upgrading at the same time? How do you integrate those pieces together?
Okay, so as far as local use goes, and again, this can spiral quickly into what's going on with what I called segment 2 that's closed. So that, our project wasn't, we had no say, no bearing on what was going on there. So that has been a big impact to local use, and that's been something that's been a bit of a hot topic in the area. Our project, I would say, didn't have a huge amount of traffic on it. Now it still was used. People would still come in from the northeast side, from the dam side, and they would want to drive the route and take a look because it is still a very scenic route. So the route was going to stay open during construction. I think that was there was never a thought that we would close this road down to construct it. Not just for the tourists, even though I think we were talking maybe a couple hundred cars a day. But you've also got the marina who's, they're trying to stay in business. And so we worked with them pretty regularly to figure out a plan there. So we had little disruptions to public traffic, which would be, hey, during the day, you may experience up to, say, a 20-minute delay on the route, but we intended to keep that fully open. Does that answer the question there of what you were looking at?
It does.
Okay.
So that, and then I guess from an engineering perspective, how do you prioritize that? So is there a kind of a weighting factor where you're like local, because you've got these balances, right? You're like, okay, so acknowledging the history, thinking about NEPA, what's there, people using it right now locally current, and then what you're building for in the future and thinking about climate, right? So those all priorities. And so, is there any rule that tells you how do you prioritize the local compared to others?
That's a great question. I'm not aware of anything like that, but what I would say is what you said is they all matter, right? So as far as the experience, so not just during construction, maybe what you're getting at is kind of what's the immediate improvement of the route that's maybe not in the future, but it's going to impact the users at this moment, like right when it's completed. There was no intent to make it, we just want to send everybody down the Apache Trail at 55 miles an hour. That was, I would say, it's not something where we were trying to, and really this, sorry if I'm talking in circles a little bit, but working out my answer here. When you have the stakeholders of, Arizona Department of Transportation, the Tonto National Forest, the marina, the engineers, we're working to solve in the way that they would like us to solve it. It's not really, sure, I'd love to, everybody, let's get you down there at 55 miles an hour and safely and all of that, right? But they understand that there's a much different use for this route. There are other ways where you can travel Arizona quickly. That's not the intent of this route. And so there was no consideration to, make it faster, easier for people to get there. And in fact, there was kind of a desire to keep it at a primitive feel, because it's not an incredibly safe route. If you get on this route and you see, if it starts to feel like a modern highway, well, it's not designed as a modern highway. And we want people to feel almost a little nervous when they ride this route, so that they keep their speed down and all of that. So
it totally makes sense. Yeah, because the space I'm going to with that question was, we might in a water resources mindset, just channelize it and get that water out of here, right? But it's kind of, we're all starting to recognize one person's wetland is another person's swamp is another, right? And so you gotta, and so one person's, I want to travel at 70 miles an hour and have airbags and anti-lock brakes work properly is very different than another person's. I want to wander down this trail, and those are very different priorities, while still making sure local businesses have access, local residents have access. So along those lines, when you're thinking about NEPA and you're trying to address all this, right? I mean, of course, we're worried about, are you going to destroy the last breeding space of XYZ animal? Are you going to disrupt, some kind of archaeological site, right? But How much has some of the modern kind of environmental justice issues, have you seen some of those creep in with this
Mm.
particular project in any way you can think about, or anything you've gleaned from as you've been pulling those together, pulling this together, and you say, actually, we have started to hear more about these other issues being part of our NEPA considerations, or just generally in those considerations?
Yeah, that's a great question because it's a very important topic, and it's been an important shift, I think, in the last, however many years, in the NEPA process to put more of an emphasis on those types of items that maybe were lesser considered in the past. I've seen that a lot on some of my other projects, but I'd say on this one, I, I can't say that we really touched on those items too much. I mean, obviously they were explored, but I don't think there were too many outcomes on there. Nothing that's popping into my head. If I think of something as we go on, I'll let you know. But
And that's why we just ask. It's just, I got these questions and we have this discussion. So now maybe, then of course, wildfire comes through, vegetation removed, things destabilize, water, rain comes. That doesn't make it any better. So now we got folks with a little bit more maybe technical questions, and if those weren't ones you specifically worked on, you can certainly demur on them. But folks were curious about how slope stability issues were resolved, runoff into the river, assumptions made on the design of the culverts, type of pavement materials that were considered. So some of those more detailed things. So maybe I'll run through them, or if you want to answer any of those off the top of your head that makes sense. So,
but maybe I'll jump in. I got a couple of them stood out. I'll talk through those, and if I miss any, let me know. So if we talk about slope stability, I would say the slopes immediately adjacent to the road were not burned and were not impacted, right? But during the flooding, there were definitely some instabilities in a few areas. They were undercut a little bit. The slopes out there are mostly a decomposed granite material, so it does erode quite easily. There are some areas of really intact granite, but mostly it's a fairly loose decomposed granite material. So what we did during construction was we weren't too concerned about a large slope stability type failure where you would see a big sliding plane or something like that. It's mostly an erosion problem. So we made sure that there were ditches, and we just explained to Arizona DOT, hey, you're going to have to maintain these ditches. We did have 5 locations on the project where we had some site distance issues. And so we felt these were areas where we could bring down a little bit of a hillside, not really impact the historic feel of the route or anything like that, but really improve site distance and improve some safety. And so we did have 4 of those like kind of decomposed granite slopes that we were laying back, and then we had an area of rock blasting in a big through cut of a big granite knob. So those were pretty interesting, kind of from the geotech point of view. If somebody's asked about pavement materials, this was something that was kind of debated back and forth. The final decision was to simply chip seal the route, and so I'm sure most may not be familiar with what chip seal is, but is really just a 2 layers of a chip seal that it's basically a gravel, relatively fine gravel with some emulsified asphalt that goes in, and you come up with a road that it almost looks gravel in a sense, right? So it doesn't look like a full paved road. And so we went with that because it does have, it'd be easier for ADOT to maintain. It's going to look more like the original gravel surface.
Sound more like it when you're driving over it. Yeah.
Sound more like it. It'll give you that feel. It'd be easier. It was a little bit easier cost wise. We did pave a few of the very steep sections because there was a worry that the chip seal wouldn't hold up the really, really steep sections. So we did pave a few of those, but surface that with chip seal. So those were two of the ones that you mentioned. What
Culvert
were,
design?
what's that?
Assumptions on the culvert design?
Yeah, so and I'm not a hydraulics engineer.
And again,
But
that's if you want to
yeah,
demur on any of them, that's totally okay. That's
yeah. So but with those, I don't know, I can't remember off the top of my head, what types of design events we were looking at. But those we did go through, we did get a topographic survey, we did do modeling. We sized these things appropriately. There were a few, I think, that we left intact. They were maybe under designed according to our model, but seemed to be performing well, but they were smaller ones. We took a lot of the small pipe culverts. I mean, we'd had areas where we had like a 36-inch culvert, and we ended up replacing it with like a double box culvert structure. I mean, it was that under designed. So yeah, it was very robust drainage improvements. Everybody came to the conclusion they wanted this route to exist in the future, and that was really the best thing we could do to preserve that.
Very fun. So in terms then of that preservation, now this kind of gets over then to thinking about kind of the historical panels and the interpretation and the coffee table book, which people did specifically ask, is it available? So if we've got, if you can to speak to, but then also kind of like 3D scanning of the route. Was there any thought made to like, while it's before we change it, let's get as much detail of it there? And was that considered, or is that something that you've got any experience with you can speak to? So if you can speak to a few of those.
So a 3D scan, I would say, was not considered. I'm not sure exactly what's meant by a 3D scan, but we did that's where the drone photography came into place. So we did want to get, and there's hundreds and hundreds of those photographs that are meant to capture it from all angles.
Okay.
So there's many of those, and they're pretty incredible. So that was something that was done, along with the hair documentation. The interpretive panels, they're just interpretive panels. I do think they're pretty cool, and they can be effective, but you're right, you got to get out of your car to go look at them, and not a lot of people are going to be doing that. So that was the other piece. The coffee table book, it is not available yet. It's still in production. Last I had been involved with it, we had worked out the outline, and we knew what all the contents were going to be. We had decided on a layout, but the actual writing of the book had not been completed yet. So if I had to guess, you're probably looking at another year or so until that's available. And I believe it's going to be available in both print and digital. That was the plan. And that you'd be able to get it from ADOT. So they're going to be the ones kind of housing it, or owning it. Another point on that is, so we did consider a lot of different things.
And that's Arizona DOT for those that are watching and watch this later on.
Yes.
I'm just throwing that in.
Yes, yes, Arizona DOT. You talked about, were there other things considered, and there definitely were. One of the ideas brought up during all these discussions was, could we develop an app? And if we put together an app that somehow links people to the history as they're driving the route, and there was a few that were pushing pretty hard for that idea. And although could be really interesting, and that there's an app for everything nowadays, so it's like, hey, why not, right? We struggled with, number one, there's zero cell service in this area, so you'd have to plan ahead. You'd have to download it ahead of time, plan ahead, which some people may want to do. But the other part is, who's gonna maintain this app into the future? And we wanted to get something that, so say you put a bunch of investment into an app, and then 5 years from now nobody can use it. Well, that's pretty disappointing. And those kinds of things happen. So just being realistic about that, we thought, okay, best to take the financial resources. And I'll tell you, the coffee table book is a considerable financial investment to get that thing developed. And that came right out of the budget for the project. So, let's get as much as we can that is solid, that'll be available, well into the future. That was the goal.
Fantastic, fantastic. So one kind of final question to kind of move towards our wrap up is, how do students study? Like, so let's say somebody's environmental engineer, environmental science, they're interested in these transportation issues, right? You had early on said, well, I kind of came in at civil transportation and I actually kind of like the environmental, and now you fell in this space, right? Where you're doing it this side and reaching this way. How about the people that are from the other side reaching toward you? Any suggestions for training or interest, or so how do the environmentals that have an interest in transportations and these kinds of systems, what would be your advice to them?
Well, that is a good question. I think one of the things I learned throughout this process is you can't underestimate how important it is to have a great environmental protection specialist on your project. And so that's somebody who really understands, the policy, the permitting, all of that. I mean, that to me is really, really valuable. So I would say, if you're considering environmental engineering, environmental science, don't overlook the transportation field as a way to contribute to environmental science. I mean, we've got a great group here at Stanley who do environmental engineering. I find them to be, excellent resources. I think they enjoy their career. So, we've got that. I would say also another thing I'm just recently familiar with is what I talked about, that more quantitative approach to looking at flows, future flows based off of predicted climate events and the increase in different events. That's another group we have right here at Stanley I think they're doing some really interesting things. So, the industry is going this way. These things are not going to go away. We all know that. And I say, if you're interested in these things, bring them to the transportation field. It's come down, and like I said, I was with Federal Highways for quite a while as an engineer for Federal Highway Administration, and that's the message we get from the highest levels is that you're gonna sorry, something popped up here.
Oh no, I just that we actually had a note. We had a note from one of the people that are listening, who actually one of the trustees from the academy who suggested one of the things on plussing up on what you were talking about is that ASCE and TNDI and TRB, Transportation Research Board, those would be ways if folks in environmental are looking for who to reach out to. DOTs,
oh, I see.
Yeah, so I guess.
Yeah.
Probably agree with those, being a transportation person.
Yeah, absolutely. Every agency, every entity within transportation is interacting with these topics, and so you're going to see. So it's going to be all over the transportation market. And I think maybe just a personal takeaway is, for transportation, you can't underestimate the importance of having good environmental scientists, environmental people, be a part of these projects. I mean, this is a big part of the infrastructure of the United States. This is what we do. So if you want to have opportunity to impact the environment positively, I think transportation is a way to do that.
Thanks, Dustin. I appreciate it. Any final words you want to leave us with?
No, I really just appreciate the time. Thank you very much for hosting me here and being so kind. I really appreciate everybody.
We appreciate you taking time out to give us this. It was incredibly informative. Folks are sticking with it because we're really learning a lot from this webinar. I appreciate it. I'll turn it over to Marissa to wrap us up.
Okay, thanks everyone for all your questions, and thank you to Dustin for sharing your knowledge with us today. If you have any additional questions on this topic, please reach out to me and I'd be happy to put you in touch with Dustin. We have several webinars planned in the near future, so you can go to aaees.org/events to reserve your spot. Just a reminder, if you're not yet an AAES member and you're considering joining the Academy, please email me to discuss our membership options. And last but not least, the PDH certificates for this event will be sent out this week. That's all for now. We enjoyed being with you all today. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.